Sarah Martinez walked through the automatic doors of the Veterans Affairs Medical Center, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her appointment slip. The familiar smell of disinfectant and the sound of squeaking wheels on linoleum floors brought back memories she'd rather forget. She'd been putting off this routine checkup for months, but her sister Emma had finally convinced her to go. The waiting room was filled with the usual mix of veterans, some old, some young, all carrying invisible burdens. Sarah found an empty chair in the corner, away from the main traffic. She pulled her long sleeves down carefully, making sure the fabric covered the scars that decorated her arms like a roadmap of pain. As she sat down, she noticed a man across the room watching her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of posture that screamed military even in civilian clothes. His dark hair was cut short, and his eyes had that alert quality that came from years of training. Sarah recognized the look, because she'd seen it in her own mirror, for years after coming home. The man's name was Marcus Thompson, though Sarah didn't know that yet. What she also didn't know was that Marcus had been watching her not out of curiosity, but out of concern. He'd spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL before transitioning to work as a counselor at the VA. His trained eye could spot the signs of struggle from across a crowded room, and something about the way Sarah held herself, the way she kept tugging at her sleeves, set off alarm bells in his mind. Marcus had seen too many veterans slip through the cracks, too many who suffered in silence. He'd made it his mission to reach out to those who seemed to be drowning, even when they didn't realize they were underwater. Sarah Martinez was clearly one of those people. When Sarah's name was called, she stood up quickly. Perhaps too quickly. Her purse slipped from her lap, spilling contents across the floor. Pills scattered, and among them, Marcus caught sight of several prescription bottles. As Sarah hurried to collect everything, Marcus approached. "Here, let me help," he said, his voice gentle but commanding in the way that came naturally to former military personnel. Sarah looked up, embarrassed. "Thank you, but I've got it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus knelt down anyway, helping to gather the scattered items. As he handed her the last prescription bottle, their eyes met briefly. In that moment, Marcus saw something that confirmed his suspicions. It wasn't just the medication or the way she dressed to hide her arms. It was the look in her eyes. The same haunted expression he'd seen in countless mirrors during his own dark period. "Sarah Martinez?" The nurse called again, looking around the waiting room. "That's me," Sarah said, standing up with her belongings hastily stuffed back into her purse. As she walked toward the nurse, Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives. He approached the reception desk. "Hey, Maria," he said to the receptionist, who knew him well from his work at the facility. "I need to know who's handling the Martinez appointment." "Dr. Patterson," Maria replied without looking up from her computer. "Why?" "I think she might benefit from some additional support. Can you make a note in her file that I'm available for consultation if needed?" Maria looked at him with understanding. She'd worked at the VA long enough to recognize when Marcus had identified someone who needed extra help. "I'll make the note." Meanwhile, Sarah sat in the examination room, her heart racing as she waited for Dr. Patterson. She'd rehearsed her answers to the routine questions, the same lies she'd been telling for months. Yes, she was sleeping fine. No, she wasn't having any problems with depression or anxiety. Yes, she was adjusting well to civilian life. Dr. Patterson, a kind woman in her 50s, entered the room with Sarah's chart. "Good morning, Sarah. How are you feeling today?" "Fine," Sarah replied automatically. "Just here for my routine checkup." "Oh." The examination proceeded normally at first. Blood pressure, weight, general questions about her health. But when Dr. Patterson asked Sarah to roll up her sleeves for a blood draw, the atmosphere in the room changed. Sarah hesitated. "Can't you use my hand instead?" Dr. Patterson looked at her with concern. "We can. But the arm is usually more comfortable. Is there a reason you'd prefer your hand?" The silence stretched between them. Sarah's mind raced, trying to come up with an excuse, but nothing came. Finally, with visible reluctance, she slowly rolled up her left sleeve. The scars were extensive, some old, some relatively fresh. They formed a pattern that told a story of ongoing struggle, of nights when the pain became too much to bear, when the only relief came from physical sensation that could override the emotional agony. Dr. Patterson's expression remained professional, but Sarah could see the concern in her eyes. "Sarah, how long have you been dealing with self-harm?" The question hung in the air like a confession waiting to be heard. Sarah's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "It's not. I don't," she started, then stopped. The lies felt impossible suddenly. "I'm not here to judge you," Dr. Patterson said gently. "I'm here to help, but I need you to be honest with me so I can do that effectively." Sarah's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for months. "I don't know what to say. I don't know how to explain it." "Why don't we start with when it began?" Sarah took a shaky breath. The story came out in fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror reflecting different aspects of her pain. She'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic. She'd seen things, done things, lost people that mattered to her. Coming home should have been a relief, but instead, it felt like being dropped into an alien world where nothing made sense anymore. The nightmares had started almost immediately. Then the anxiety. The feeling of being constantly on edge, waiting for the next explosion, the next casualty. The medication helped sometimes, but the side effects made her feel disconnected from herself. The counseling sessions felt like performing for an audience that could never really understand. "The first time I hurt myself, it was almost an accident," Sarah admitted. "I was working in my garden, and I scraped my arm on a rose bush. For just a moment, the physical pain made everything else quiet. It was the first peace I'd felt in months." Dr. Patterson nodded, encouraging her to continue. "It escalated from there. When the nightmares got bad, when I couldn't sleep, when I felt like I was going crazy, it was the only thing that seemed to help. I know it's wrong. I know it's not healthy. But I don't know what else to do." Dr. Patterson made notes as Sarah spoke, but her attention remained focused on her patient. "Sarah, what you're describing is not uncommon among veterans, especially those who've experienced combat trauma. The important thing is that you're here now, and you're being honest about what's happening." "I feel so ashamed," Sarah whispered. "I'm supposed to be strong. I saved lives over there. I was good at my job. But here, I can barely function." "Strength isn't about not struggling," Dr. Patterson replied. "Strength is about seeking help when you need it. Which is exactly what you're doing right now, even if you don't realize it." As they continued talking, Dr. Patterson began to formulate a plan. Sarah clearly needed more support than just medical treatment. She needed someone who understood the unique challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life. Someone who'd walked a similar path. "Sarah, I'd like to introduce you to someone," Dr. Patterson said. "His name is Marcus Thompson. He's a counselor here who specializes in working with veterans. He's also former military himself." Sarah's immediate reaction was resistance. "I don't need a counselor. I've tried that before. They just want to put me on more medication, or tell me to think positive thoughts. Marcus is different. He understands because he's been where you are. Would you be willing to meet with him? Just once? If it doesn't help, you don't have to continue." Before Sarah could answer, there was a gentle knock on the door. Dr. Patterson opened it to find Marcus standing in the hallway. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "Maria said you might want to consult with me about something." Dr. Patterson looked at Sarah for permission. After a long moment, Sarah nodded reluctantly. Marcus entered the room, and Sarah immediately recognized him as the man from the waiting room, who'd helped her pick up her things. She felt a flush of embarrassment, wondering how much he'd observed, how much he'd figured out. "We've actually met," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Sort of. I'm Marcus Thompson." "Sarah Martinez," she replied quietly. Marcus took a seat, careful to maintain a comfortable distance. His approach was completely different from other counselors Sarah had encountered. There was no clipboard, no formal assessment questions, no clinical detachment. "Dr. Patterson mentioned you might benefit from someone to talk to who understands the military experience," Marcus said. "I'm not here to convince you of anything, or push any agenda. I'm just here to listen, if you want to talk." Something about his manner put Sarah at ease despite her reservations. Maybe it was the way he sat, alert but relaxed, or the fact that he didn't immediately launch into questions about her symptoms. "How long were you in?" Sarah asked. 12 years. Navy SEALs. Did 4 deployments before I transitioned out." Marcus's answer was straightforward, without the bravado that sometimes came with special operations backgrounds. "Why did you leave?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Same reason a lot of us do. The job was taking more than it was giving. I realized I needed to find a different way to serve." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of the struggle she knew came with military transition. She found them in the small details, the way his eyes moved when he talked about leaving the service, the slight tension in his shoulders. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Every day. But I don't regret leaving. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit when something isn't working anymore and make a change." Dr. Patterson watched the interaction with interest. In just a few minutes, Marcus had established more genuine connection with Sarah than many counselors managed in weeks of sessions. "Sarah," Marcus continued, "I don't know your specific story, but I know the feeling of coming home and not recognizing the person in the mirror. I know what it's like to feel like you're failing at something that used to define you. I know what it's like to feel like nobody understands." Sarah's defenses, carefully constructed over months of isolation, began to crack. "How did you get through it?" "Honestly, I didn't handle it well at first. I made a lot of mistakes, hurt people I cared about, nearly lost everything that mattered to me. But eventually, I learned that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was strategy." The military metaphor resonated with Sarah in a way that clinical language never had. Strategy. That was something she could understand. "What kind of strategy?" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "The same kind of strategy we used in operations overseas. Assess the situation honestly, identify available resources, develop a plan, execute with commitment, and adjust as needed. The difference is that the mission now is rebuilding your life instead of completing an objective in a combat zone." For the first time in months, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Not the false optimism that well-meaning friends and family had tried to force on her, but genuine possibility. "Would you be willing to work with me?" Marcus asked. "Not as a patient and therapist, but as one veteran helping another figure out the next phase of the mission." Sarah looked at Dr. Patterson, who nodded encouragingly. Then she looked back at Marcus. This stranger, who somehow seemed to understand her better in 30 minutes than most people had in years. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said honestly. "Ready is a luxury," Marcus replied. "Sometimes, you just have to start where you are and figure it out as you go. That's what we do in the field. Right? Adapt and overcome." Sarah almost smiled at the familiar phrase. Adapt and overcome. Exactly. "So what do you say? Want to give it a try?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, not sure if she was about to fall or fly. "Okay," she said finally. "But I have conditions. Name them. No judgment. No pushing me to talk about things I'm not ready to discuss. And if I decide it's not working, I can stop without a lecture about commitment." "Agreed," Marcus said without hesitation. "My only condition is that you be honest with me. If something I'm doing isn't helping, tell me. If you're struggling, tell me. If you're thinking about hurting yourself, definitely tell me. Deal?" Sarah hesitated at the last part. But something about Marcus's direct approach made her feel like honesty might actually be possible. "Deal." Under 9. Under 9. Under 9. Dr. Patterson smiled as she watched this exchange. She'd seen Marcus work with other veterans before. But there was something special about his connection with Sarah. Maybe it was because they were both medics in their own way, both people who dedicated themselves to saving others and now needed to learn how to save themselves. As the appointment concluded, Marcus gave Sarah his card with his direct number. "You can call any time," he said, "day or night. If you're having a crisis, don't wait for our next scheduled appointment." Sarah pocketed the card, surprised by the gesture. Most mental health professionals maintained strict boundaries about contact outside of scheduled sessions. "Thank you," she said. And for the first time, she actually meant it when talking to a counselor. As Sarah left the medical center that day, she felt different somehow. Not fixed, not even better exactly, but different. Like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. The scars on her arms still ached. The nightmares would probably still come, and the struggle was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she had hope that someone might actually understand. And sometimes, understanding was the first step toward healing. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's first meeting with Marcus, and she was sitting in his office for their 4th session. The room was nothing like the sterile clinical spaces she'd experienced before. Marcus had set it up to feel more like a living room than a medical facility. There were books about military history on the shelves, a few military challenge coins displayed on his desk, and photographs of landscapes from various deployments. "How was your week?" Marcus asked, settling into his chair with a cup of coffee. Sarah had been dreading this question because the truth was complicated. "Better some days, worse others," she said honestly. "Tuesday night was really bad." Marcus didn't immediately jump into problem-solving mode like other counselors had. Instead, he just waited, giving her space to continue if she wanted to. "I had the dream again," Sarah continued. "The one about Rodriguez." Rodriguez had been her closest friend in Afghanistan, a fellow medic who died in an IED explosion while they were trying to evacuate wounded soldiers. Sarah had been there, had tried to save him, had failed. It was the incident that haunted her most. What happened in the dream this time? Same thing. "I'm trying to stop the bleeding, but my hands keep shaking and I can't get the bandages to stay. He keeps asking me why I'm not helping him, and I can't explain that I am trying. Then I wake up and..." Sarah stopped, pulling at her sleeves unconsciously. "And you hurt yourself," Marcus finished gently. Sarah nodded, shame flooding her face. "I used my sister's kitchen knife. Just small cuts. But I broke my promise to you about calling first." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Hey, look at me." When Sarah finally made eye contact, he continued. "You're telling me about it now. That's what matters. The fact that you're here, being honest about what happened, that's huge progress. It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like failure. Sarah, recovery isn't a straight line. It's more like..." Marcus paused, thinking. "Remember in Afghanistan? When you had to navigate through hostile territory, did you ever take a direct route? Never. Too dangerous. We'd zigzag, double back, sometimes hide and wait." Exactly. Getting better is the same kind of navigation. Sometimes you have to take steps that feel like going backward in order to ultimately move forward safely. This military framework continued to resonate with Sarah in ways that traditional therapy speak never had. Marcus had a gift for translating emotional concepts into language that made sense to someone with her background. "Tell me about Rodriguez," Marcus said. "Not about how he died, but about who he was." Sarah's expression softened. "He was from Texas. Had this ridiculous accent that got thicker when he was tired. He wanted to be a pediatric nurse when he got out. He was always making jokes, even in the worst situations. Called me Doc Martinez, even though we were the same rank. Sounds like he was important to you. He was my anchor over there. When things got crazy, when I started to panic, he had this way of keeping me grounded. He'd start talking about his plans for nursing school, or his girlfriend back home, or some stupid movie he wanted to see. Normal stuff that reminded me there was a world outside of what we were dealing with. What do you think he'd say if he could see you now?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "He'd probably be mad at me for hurting myself. He hated when people he cared about were in pain. And what else? He'd want me to get help. He was always the one pushing people to go to medical when they were hurt, even for small things. He'd say there was no shame in taking care of yourself." Marcus watched as Sarah worked through this realization. Sometimes the best counseling happened when clients found their own insights, rather than having them imposed from outside. "Sarah, I want to try something different today. Instead of focusing on the self-harm as a problem to be solved, let's talk about what it's doing for you. What need is it meeting? Sarah looked surprised by the question. I don't understand. People don't engage in behaviors that serve no purpose. Self-harm might be harmful, but it's doing something for you emotionally. If we can understand what that is, we can find healthier ways to meet the same need. Sarah thought about this. When I cut myself, everything else stops for a while. The noise in my head goes quiet. It's like a reset button. So it's giving you relief from psychological pain by creating physical pain? Yes, exactly. It's the only thing that works when everything else gets too loud. Marcus nodded. That makes complete sense. Your brain is overwhelmed with trauma, stress, and emotional pain. Self-harm provides immediate, reliable relief. It's actually a pretty logical coping mechanism, even though it's ultimately harmful. Sarah looked at him in surprise. No one had ever described her self-harm as logical before. Most people acted like it was crazy or attention-seeking. The challenge, Marcus continued, is finding other ways to hit that reset button without causing yourself physical harm. Things that can provide the same kind of immediate relief, but don't leave scars. Like what? That depends on what specifically triggers your need for relief. Let's map out a typical episode. Walk me through what happened Tuesday night. Step by step. Sarah took a deep breath and began to recount the evening. She'd been doing okay during the day, had even managed to have lunch with her sister Emma without feeling completely anxious. But as night approached, her mood had started to shift. I was getting ready for bed, and I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For just a second, I thought I saw Rodriguez standing behind me. I know it wasn't real, but it felt real. Then the guilt hit like a wave. What kind of guilt? Survivor's guilt. The why him and not me kind. He was a better medic than I was. He had people waiting for him at home. He had plans. And I'm the one who made it back. Marcus recognized this pattern. Survivor's guilt was common among combat veterans, especially those who'd lost close friends. What happened next? I started spiraling. Thinking about all the ways I failed over there. All the people I couldn't save. The thoughts just kept coming faster and faster, until I felt like my head was going to explode. That's when I went to Emma's kitchen, and cutting yourself provided relief from that overwhelming mental state? Immediately. As soon as I felt the pain, everything else went quiet. I could breathe again. Marcus made notes as she spoke, but his focus remained on understanding rather than judging. Okay, so we have a clear trigger pattern. Visual hallucination leads to survivor's guilt, which leads to rapid-fire negative thoughts, which leads to feeling overwhelmed, which leads to self-harm for relief. When you put it like that, it sounds almost mechanical. In many ways, it is. Trauma responses often follow predictable patterns. The good news is that if something is predictable, it's also potentially manageable. Marcus pulled out a piece of paper and drew a simple flowchart showing Sarah's trigger pattern. Let's think about intervention points. Places where we can interrupt this sequence before it gets to self-harm. They spent the next hour working through alternative coping strategies for each stage of Sarah's trigger pattern. For the visual hallucinations, Marcus taught her grounding techniques, ways to anchor herself in present reality. For the survivor's guilt, they developed mantras that Rodriguez himself might have used to combat her negative self-talk. The key, Marcus explained, is to practice these techniques when you're not in crisis, so they're available to you when you need them most. As their session was ending, Marcus brought up something that had been on his mind. Sarah, I think you might benefit from connecting with other veterans who've had similar experiences. There's a support group that meets here twice a week. Sarah's immediate reaction was negative. I don't want to sit in a circle and share feelings with strangers. Marcus laughed. That's exactly what everyone says at first. But it's not like that. It's more like, imagine if you were deployed with a unit where everyone understood exactly what you were going through without having to explain it. That's what group can feel like. I don't know. I barely feel comfortable talking to you. And you're just one person. Fair enough. Tell you what. Next week, I'm running a group session specifically for combat medics and corpsmen. 5 people total. All medical personnel who served in Iraq or Afghanistan. Would you consider just observing? You don't have to participate if you don't want to. Sarah hesitated. The idea of being around other medics was both appealing and terrifying. Appealing because they would understand her experiences in ways civilians never could. Terrifying because they would understand her experiences in ways civilians never could. Can I think about it? Of course. But Sarah? Marcus waited until she was looking at him. You've been carrying this weight alone for too long. You don't have to keep doing that. After leaving Marcus's office, Sarah decided to walk home instead of taking the bus. The exercise helped clear her head, and she found herself thinking about their conversation. For the first time, someone had helped her understand her self-harm as something other than weakness or craziness. It was a coping mechanism that made sense, even if it was ultimately harmful. As she walked, her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Emma. "How was your appointment? Want to come over for dinner?" Sarah stared at the message for a moment. Usually, she would decline, preferring to isolate herself after therapy sessions. But something about today felt different. "Sure," she texted back. Emma lived in a small apartment about 20 minutes from the VA center. When Sarah arrived, she found her sister cooking pasta in a tiny kitchen, humming along to music playing from her phone. "You look different," Emma said, glancing up from the stove. "Different how?" "I don't know. Less heavy, maybe?" "How was your session with Marcus?" Sarah had been hesitant to tell Emma too much about her therapy, worried about being judged or having her sister worry even more than she already did. But tonight, she found herself opening up. "He's helping me understand why I do certain things, making it feel less like I'm crazy and more like I'm human." Emma stopped stirring the sauce and turned to face her sister. "You were never crazy." Sarah, hurt, yes. Struggling, absolutely, but never crazy. "Sometimes it feels the same. I can't imagine what you went through over there, or what it's like trying to come back from that. But I know you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. The fact that you're getting help proves that." As they sat down to eat, Sarah found herself telling Emma about Rodriguez for the first time. She'd never been able to talk about him before without breaking down. But Marcus's approach of focusing on who Rodriguez was, rather than how he died, had shifted something for her. "He sounds like he was a good friend," Emma said when Sarah finished. "The best. I just wish I could have saved him." Emma reached across the table and touched Sarah's hand. "Can I ask you something? When you were deployed, were you able to save everyone you treated?" "Of course not. We lost people despite our best efforts. It's just the nature of combat medicine. So you understand intellectually that sometimes people die despite the best medical care possible." "Yes, but when it's someone you care about, logic goes out the window." Sarah stared at her sister, struck by the simple truth of that statement. Rodriguez would have said the same thing. "He never blamed me when we lost patients. Maybe it's time to stop blaming yourself." After dinner, Sarah helped Emma clean up, and they watched a movie together. It was the first normal evening Sarah had experienced in months, and she realized how much she'd missed this kind of connection. As she was getting ready to leave, Emma asked, "Are you going to be okay tonight?" The question wasn't random. Emma had learned to recognize the signs that indicated when Sarah might be struggling with self-harm urges. "I think so," Sarah said honestly. "Marcus gave me some techniques to try if things get difficult. And you have his number if you need it?" "Yes." "Okay. But you also have my number. Promise me you'll call if you need to talk, even if it's 3 in the morning." Sarah hugged her sister goodbye, feeling grateful for Emma's unconditional support. As she walked home, she reflected on the day. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't spent the entire day thinking about her trauma or her scars. There had been moments of actual normalcy, of connection, of hope. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, Sarah caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror again. But this time, instead of seeing Rodriguez or focusing on her failures, she remembered something Marcus had said about Rodriguez wanting her to take care of herself. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the notes she'd taken during their session. Marcus had given her several grounding techniques to try, if she started to feel overwhelmed. She decided to practice them now, while she was calm, so they'd be available if she needed them later. The first technique was called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and involved identifying 5 things she could see, 4 things she could touch, 3 things she could hear, 2 things she could smell, and 1 thing she could taste. It was designed to anchor her in the present moment when her mind started spiraling into past trauma. 5 things she could see: her reflection in the mirror, the blue towels hanging on the rack, the small plant on the windowsill, the bottle of soap by the sink, the picture of her and Emma on vacation last year. 4 things she could touch: the cool marble of the bathroom counter, the soft fabric of her pajama shirt, the smooth surface of her phone, the bristles of her toothbrush. 3 things she could hear: the hum of the air conditioning, cars passing by outside, the neighbor's television through the thin walls. 2 things she could smell: the lavender soap Emma had given her, the faint scent of the pasta sauce still lingering on her clothes. 1 thing she could taste: the mint from her toothpaste. The exercise was simple, almost silly, but Sarah found that it did exactly what Marcus had promised. It pulled her out of her head and into the present moment. She felt grounded, centered, calm. As she got into bed, Sarah realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't dreading sleep. She wasn't anticipating nightmares or planning what to do if the dark thoughts came. She was just tired, in a normal, healthy way. She thought about Marcus's question about what Rodriguez would want for her. He'd want her to sleep well, to take care of herself, to build a life worth living. He'd want her to honor his memory, not through guilt and self-punishment, but through healing and growth. Sarah fell asleep that night without nightmares, and when she woke up the next morning, she made a decision that surprised her. She was going to attend Marcus's group session for combat medics. Not because she was ready, but because Rodriguez would have wanted her to try. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared. 6 months had passed since Sarah first walked into the VA medical center for what she thought would be a routine checkup. Now she was standing outside the same building. But everything felt different. She was here early for Marcus's group session, the one she'd initially agreed to observe, but had ended up participating in for the past several months. The group had become an anchor in her week, a place where she could speak freely about experiences that seemed impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't lived them. The 5 members were all combat medics or corpsmen who'd served in Iraq or Afghanistan, and their stories shared common threads of trauma, guilt, and the struggle to find meaning in civilian life. Today was special, though. It was Sarah's 6-month anniversary of being self-harm-free. She carried a small coin in her pocket that Marcus had given her, similar to the sobriety coins used in addiction recovery programs. 6 months might not seem like a long time to some people, but for Sarah, it represented a lifetime of small victories and daily choices to choose healing over hurt. As she entered the building, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. It hadn't been linear or easy. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, nights when she'd come close to breaking her streak. But each time she'd faced those moments, she'd used the tools Marcus had taught her, reached out to her support network, and found ways to navigate through the darkness without harming herself. The group meeting room was on the 2nd floor, a comfortable space with chairs arranged in a circle and windows that let in natural light. Sarah was the first to arrive. As she often was, she'd learned that having a few minutes to center herself before the others arrived helped her feel more grounded for the session. Marcus arrived next, carrying his usual cup of coffee and a folder with notes from their individual sessions. He'd become more than just a counselor to Sarah over the past months. He'd become a mentor, a guide who understood not just the clinical aspects of trauma recovery but the personal reality of rebuilding a life after military service. "How are you feeling about today?" Marcus asked as he settled into his chair. Sarah touched the coin in her pocket. "Proud, I guess, and a little scared." "Scared of what?" "That I'll jinx it somehow. That talking about my progress will make it disappear." Marcus nodded with understanding. "That's common in recovery. The fear that success is temporary or fragile. But Sarah, The progress you've made isn't luck or magic. It's the result of hard work, commitment, and learning new skills. Those things don't just disappear. The other group members began arriving. There was David, a former Army medic who struggled with chronic pain and depression after being injured by an IED. Lisa, a Navy corpsman dealing with PTSD and anxiety following multiple deployments aboard hospital ships. James, another Army medic working through survivor's guilt after losing several soldiers under his care. And Maria, a former Air Force pararescue medic who'd been sexually assaulted during her service and was dealing with both military trauma and military sexual trauma. Each of them had their own story, their own struggles, their own victories. But they'd bonded over their shared experiences and their commitment to supporting each other's healing. Sarah has something she wants to share with the group today, Marcus said as they began their session. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, but it was the good kind of nervous energy that came with excitement rather than anxiety. She'd practiced what she wanted to say. But now that the moment was here, she decided to speak from the heart instead. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a doctor's office showing my scars to someone for the first time, she began. I was convinced that I was broken beyond repair, that the best I could hope for was managing my damage rather than actually healing from it. The group listened intently. They'd all been where Sarah was describing, though they'd expressed it in different ways. I thought healing meant going back to who I was before deployment, before Rodriguez died, before everything went wrong. But what I've learned is that healing doesn't mean going backward. It means integrating all the parts of your experience and building something new. David nodded. That's huge, Sarah. I spent years trying to get back to my old self, instead of accepting that I'd grown and changed. The self-harm was my way of trying to control pain, Sarah continued. Physical pain I could manage, could direct, could stop when I wanted to. Emotional pain felt endless and overwhelming. But through working with Marcus and with all of you, I've learned that emotional pain doesn't have to be overwhelming if you have the right tools to deal with it. Lisa leaned forward. What tools helped you the most? Sarah thought about the question carefully. The grounding techniques Marcus taught me were crucial, especially in the beginning. But honestly, what helped most was learning to talk about Rodriguez without falling apart, being able to honor his memory without drowning in guilt about surviving when he didn't. She looked around the circle at these people who'd become like family to her. And having people who understood without me having to explain everything. When I told civilian friends about my nightmares, they'd say things like, "Have you tried not thinking about it?" When I told you guys, you'd share your own nightmare stories, and we'd problem solve together. Marcus watched this exchange with satisfaction. One of the most powerful aspects of group therapy was witnessing members support each other in ways that even the best individual therapy couldn't replicate. James, who'd been quiet during most of the session, finally spoke up. Sarah, can I ask you about the really bad days? The ones where you almost gave in to the urge to hurt yourself? How did you get through those? Sarah appreciated the honesty of the question. I had a plan. Marcus helped me create it. On my phone, I had a list of things to try before resorting to self-harm. Some were immediate coping strategies, like the ice cube technique or intense exercise. Others were people to call, including everyone in this room. She pulled out her phone and showed them the note she'd created. But the most important thing on the list was a reminder that feelings are temporary. No matter how intense the pain felt in the moment, it wouldn't last forever. I just had to survive it long enough for it to pass. Maria smiled. I have a similar list. Though mine also includes terrible reality TV shows that are so ridiculous they're distracting. The group laughed, and Sarah felt the familiar warmth of being understood by people who got it. This was what had been missing from her other attempts at therapy. The ability to find humor and connection even in the midst of serious discussion about trauma and recovery. There's something else I want to share, Sarah said. I've been thinking about what comes next. How I want to use my experience to help others. Marcus raised an eyebrow with interest. This was the first time Sarah had mentioned future goals beyond just managing her symptoms. I've been talking with Dr. Patterson about the possibility of training as a peer counselor here at the VA, using my experience as both a combat medic and someone who's been through trauma recovery to help other veterans who are struggling. The group erupted in supportive comments. They all knew Sarah well enough to recognize that this decision represented a major shift in how she saw herself and her future. "What made you think about peer counseling?" Marcus asked. "Honestly, it was something Rodriguez said to me once, when we were talking about what we wanted to do after the military. He said he thought I'd be good at helping people because I cared about others more than I cared about myself. At the time, I thought that was a compliment. Now I realize it was also a warning." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "Learning to care for myself. To treat myself with the same compassion I'd show a wounded soldier. That was the hardest part of recovery. But now that I'm getting better at it, I want to help other people learn the same skills." Marcus felt a deep sense of pride watching Sarah's transformation. When they'd first met, she'd been consumed by shame and self-blame, convinced that her struggles made her weak or broken. Now she was talking about using those very struggles as a source of strength to help others. "The peer counselor program is excellent," Marcus said, "and I think you'd be incredibly effective. You have the clinical background from your medic training, the personal experience of trauma and recovery, and the communication skills I've watched you develop in group." As their session concluded, the group members exchanged hugs and made plans to meet for coffee later that week. This informal socializing had become as important to their recovery as the structured therapy sessions. After the others left, Marcus and Sarah stayed behind to talk privately. "I'm proud of you," Marcus said simply. "Not just for the 6 months without self-harm, but for the whole journey. The person sitting here today is so different from the person I met in Dr. Patterson's office." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of this." She gestured around the room, where so much of her healing had taken place. "You did the work, Sarah. I just provided some guidance and tools. The courage, the commitment, the willingness to keep trying even when it was hard, that all came from you." As they walked out of the building together, Sarah noticed that her reflection in the glass doors didn't trigger the usual anxiety anymore. She saw someone who'd been through hell and found her way back, someone who carried scars but wasn't defined by them. 3 months later, Sarah started her training as a peer counselor at the VA. Her first client was a young Marine who'd lost his best friend in an IED explosion and had been struggling with survivor's guilt and self-destructive behaviors. "I know exactly how you feel," Sarah told him during their first session, and she meant it. "But I also know that feeling doesn't have to be permanent." She showed him the techniques Marcus had taught her, shared the wisdom she'd gained from her group members, and most importantly, offered him what she'd needed most during her darkest times: hope that recovery was possible, and proof that someone could understand his experience without judgment. Marcus observed some of Sarah's early sessions as part of her training supervision, and he was struck by her natural ability to connect with struggling veterans. She had an intuitive sense of when to push and when to back off, when to offer practical coping strategies and when to simply sit with someone in their pain. "You're a natural at this," he told her after one particularly challenging session with a veteran who'd been resistant to all previous treatment attempts. "It helps that I remember what it felt like to be on the other side of this conversation," Sarah replied. "I remember thinking that no one could possibly understand what I was going through. Being able to say, 'I've been there too,' and actually mean it, that changes everything." A year after her first visit to the VA for what was supposed to be a routine checkup, Sarah found herself back in Dr. Patterson's office. But this time, she was there for a follow-up appointment to discuss her progress and her new role as a peer counselor. "How are you sleeping?" Dr. Patterson asked. The same question she'd asked during that first appointment. "Better than I have in years," Sarah replied honestly. "I still have the occasional nightmare, but I have tools to deal with them now. And when I wake up, I don't feel hopeless anymore." "And the scars?" Sarah looked down at her arms, where the marks from her self-harm were still visible but had faded significantly. "They're still there, and they probably always will be, but I don't see them as symbols of weakness anymore. They're reminders of how far I've come." Dr. Patterson smiled. "That's a beautiful way to look at it. Marcus taught me that scars are evidence of healing, not just evidence of injury. The body's way of saying, 'I survived this, and I'm stronger now.'" As Sarah left the medical center that day, She thought about Rodriguez and what he would think of her life now. She was using her medical training again, helping people heal. She had relationships with people who understood and supported her. She was building a life that felt meaningful and connected. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to her group members. 1-year anniversary dinner this weekend. The responses came quickly, all enthusiastic agreement. These people who'd started as strangers in a therapy group had become chosen family. United by their shared commitment to healing and their understanding of what it took to rebuild a life after trauma. Marcus often used Sarah's story as an example when training other counselors about the importance of meeting veterans where they were and speaking their language. Her transformation from someone consumed by guilt and self-harm to someone dedicating her life to helping others heal was remarkable. But it wasn't unique. It was what happened when the right support was provided at the right time in the right way. Sarah's journey wasn't over, of course. Recovery was an ongoing process, not a destination. There would be difficult days ahead, setbacks and challenges that would test her coping skills, but she faced the future with tools she'd never had before. A support network that understood her experience, healthy ways to manage difficult emotions, and most importantly, the knowledge that she was worthy of care and healing. Sometimes the most profound healing happens not when we fix what's broken, but when we learn to see our brokenness as part of what makes us beautifully, courageously human. Sarah had learned to wear her scars not as badges of shame, but as evidence of her strength, her survival, and her commitment to helping others find their own path to healing. In the end, her routine medical checkup had indeed been routine in one sense. It had been exactly what she needed. Exactly when she needed it. Sometimes the most life-changing moments begin with the simplest question: what are you doing here? For Sarah, the answer had led her home to herself and to a life she'd never imagined possible.